The letter, dated the 27th of October, 1492, never reached its destination. It sat in a leather satchel on a desk in the port of Palos, its ink dry before the ink of history could read it. The local port authority, a man named Vicente de la Fuente, had written to the crown with cautious optimism. 3 ships, 2 months at sea, no word. He wrote that he would hold the harbor lanterns lit through the coming weeks, just in case. He held them for 20 years. The storm that scattered the Santa Maria, the Pinta, the Nina was unremarkable by Atlantic standards, a late autumn squall that any seasoned sailor would have shrugged at. But it came at the wrong hour, from the wrong quarter, and it pushed the tiny fleet into a current that carried them east, not west. When the winds cleared, the horizon held only water. No land, no islands, no golden Chersonese. Just the long, patient roll of the ocean, turning its back on the world they had hoped to find. Vicente died in 1510, still writing letters no one answered. His son took up the lanterns. His grandson finally let them gutter out in 1545, by which point the kingdoms of Europe had turned their attention elsewhere, down the coast of Africa, around the Cape, into the Indian Ocean where silks and spices waited on familiar shores. The Americas, unknown and uncontacted, continued their own history without spectators. In 1542, a Mexica calendar priest named Tizoc stood on the roof of the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, watching the morning light spill across a city larger than any in Europe. 400,000 people moved through canals and causeways below him. The air carried smoke from cooking fires, the perfume of marigolds from the floating gardens, and the rhythmic slap of oars on the lake. He had been tracking the movements of Venus for 37 years, and in the previous month, he had received something unprecedented: trade goods from a people who called themselves the Incas, who lived at the southern edge of the world. The goods included a length of fabric woven from the wool of an animal Tizoc had never seen, dyed a deep crimson that did not fade in the sun. The traders who brought it spoke of a road that ran along mountain spines for thousands of miles. They carried knotted cords instead of painted books, yet the cords held accounts, treaties, histories, a different way of remembering, but remembering nonetheless. The Mexica had expanded south through the Maya lands over the preceding decades, not as conquerors, but as merchants, absorbing cities into a tributary network that stretched from the Gulf Coast to the highlands of what is now Guatemala. The Incas, meanwhile, had pushed north along the Andes, pacifying tribes and building their road system with a discipline that matched the Mexica causeways. The two empires met in the no-man's land of the Isthmus of Panama in 1558, not with armies but with interpreters. The meeting changed everything. Bilingual children were raised in border towns, learning Nahuatl on one side and Quechua on the other. Bronze smelting techniques flowed north, Quipu record-keeping systems traveled south. By 1600, a written adaptation of the Quipu had emerged among Mexica scribes, a hybrid system that used knotted cords on a frame, standardized by color and position, capable of recording not just numbers, but entire diplomatic treaties. The first continental census, completed in 1617, counted 22 million people from the Isthmus to the Southern Sea. The count did not include the Taino, the Carib, the people of the Great River Basins, or the Anasazi Cliff cities in the north. Those peoples had their own timelines. In 1652, a Basque fishing boat working the Grand Banks off Newfoundland hauled aboard a cod the size of a man's arm and noticed, on the distant shore, the glow of fires that did not belong to any known settlement. The captain, a weathered man named Ochoa, who kept no charts of this part of the ocean, decided not to investigate. He had no orders, no maps, no crown backing. He salted his catch and sailed home, but he told someone, and that someone told someone else. By 1660, a Franciscan friar named Rodrigo de Villena had persuaded the Spanish crown to fund a small exploratory mission, 1 ship, 40 men, instructions to observe and report back, no colonization, no conquest. The ship reached the coast of Veracruz in April of that year, and the friar stepped onto a beach where the sand was black volcanic grit and the air smelled of vanilla and damp earth. He was met by a delegation of Mexica officials who asked, in carefully phrased Nahuatl, that a translator rendered into halting Spanish, whether he had come to trade or to declare war. The question itself was a revelation. They had words for both concepts. They had protocols. They had a bureaucracy that had been preparing for the possibility of strangers from the East for 3 generations, ever since the first Maya coastal watchtowers had reported strange lights on the horizon in the years after the storm that never ended. Rodrigo was escorted to Tenochtitlan along a road paved with stone, past irrigation channels and terraced fields, through market towns where bronze tools hung beside obsidian blades, where Quipu readers consulted knotted records, where children ran between the legs of adults carrying goods from lands no European had ever seen. When he reached the central plaza of the Mexica capital, he stopped counting the steps. He had passed 80,000 buildings. He had crossed 4 causeways wide enough for 10 men abreast. He had seen aqueducts carrying fresh water from the mainland, and he had been offered a drink from a cup that held something that tasted like chocolate, sweetened with honey, spiced with chili. He wrote in his journal that night, "We are not the first to arrive here. We are simply the last to learn that this world exists." The long arc of history bent not at the moment of first contact, but at the moment contact never came. The delay of 168 years, from 1492 to 1660, was enough for civilizations to solidify, for populations to develop immunity to diseases that would otherwise have devastated them, for political structures to become resilient enough to negotiate rather than collapse. The Mexica and the Inca were not surprised by the arrival of Europeans. They had been watching the horizon for signs of the outside world for decades, preparing themselves for the moment when the ocean returned what it had taken away. In our own timeline, the Americas were broken open by an accident of wind and current. In this one, they were discovered slowly, deliberately, by a people who had built their own roads, written their own histories, and learned to trade with empires they had never met. And when the first European ships returned to Seville with Quipu records and jade masks, and tales of cities built on lakes, the mapmakers of the Old World had to redraw everything. They had been drawing the world wrong for a century and a half. The real story had been waiting on the other side of the storm, patient as a lantern burning in a window that no one had remembered to extinguish. If this vision of a slower, more deliberate Americas speaks to you, I hope you will follow the next thread of what might have been. There are other storms, other currents, other crossroads waiting to be explored.